Welcome to the Budget Mom YouTube channel. I'm Kamiko Love from thebudgetmom.com, and today, usually I would show a budget recap for February. But what I decided to do instead is I get a lot of questions, especially around the confusion of filling out the Where Did My Money Go worksheets. Today is actually the last day of February, which means that I am supposed to be closing out my budget for February and starting my new tracking period for March. So what I decided to do is to film my step-by-step process of me actually working through closing out my budget for February and filling out the Where Did My Money Go worksheets. I think this is going to be very helpful. I don't think I've done something like this on YouTube. I think I have on Instagram, but not necessarily on YouTube. So that's what this February budget recap video is going to be about. It's going to be actually step-by-step showing me doing the actual work and filling out the Where Did My Money Go worksheets. The first step in the closeout process is making sure your expense trackers for your tracking period is completely filled out and done. Meaning, I get paid on the first of every month, and I track from the first of the month to the last day of the month. Some people track their spending based on their pay schedule from the first paycheck they received until the first paycheck of the next month. It's completely up to you. I like to track from the beginning of the month to the end of the month, no matter what my pay schedule is. So first step, you want to make sure your expense trackers are completely filled out, completely done. Before you can completely fill out your expense tracker, you need to go through your cash envelopes for your tracking period and make sure if you have any leftover cash in your cash envelopes, what you want to do with that cash. For example, now I'm cashless for my gas. You can see that I spent all of my gas budget except for $3. I've decided I'm just going to let that $3 sit in my checking account cushion, which means it will be part of my starting balance for the upcoming month. I'll show you that here in just a second. For food, for my food spending, I have some cash in here. I have $22 in here. So I've decided I'm going to use this for my baby fund. So I'm going to set it aside for my baby fund. Okay. For my fun, I have $50. I never used any of my fun cash. And this is a big reason why I'm going cashless for a few more of my variable categories going into March, because I feel like I'm not utilizing some of my cash envelopes the way that I should be or the way that's going to be the most effective for my spending. So I didn't use it. So guess what? I'm going to save that for my baby fund. Okay. I'll stick that in my baby fund. The next one I have is my beauty. I have $10 left, so I'm going to save this $10 for my baby fund as well. So stick that in the pile. All right, miscellaneous. I have $50. Didn't use my miscellaneous envelope. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this for my pet fund. So I'm covering a couple of different goals here with leftover cash that I didn't spend in my variable cash envelopes. So $50. I'm going to start a new pile. Okay, that's going towards pet fund. Pets, $25. Okay. That's how much I had for cash spending for my pets. Okay, it's not my entire pet budget, but it's what I had to plan to spend for cash. Didn't spend it, so guess what? It's gonna go into my pet fund. All right, one more. Household, $50. Okay, that's also going to go towards my baby fund. Okay, I didn't spend any of my household. So now we have two piles that we need to make sure that we track. And I did this before I started the video, but I wanted to show the process of it. So here my baby fund, leftover cash that I didn't spend, going towards my baby fund. You can see that I wrote that on my expense tracker, savings, baby, 132. Okay, baby. We have $75 here for my pet fund. I added that on my expense tracker. So I had planned to spend this money. I did not spend it for my variable spending categories. I had to decide when I'm closing out my budget what I want to do with this cash, and I need to track it. So I tracked it here on my expense trackers, and then I added up all of my spending for my cash and my checking account expense tracker. Now, if you're not familiar with the way I track my spending, I have a different expense tracker for every area of movement in my life, meaning I spend in cash and I spend on my debit card for my personal budget. So I have an expense tracker for cash, and I have a totally different expense tracker for checking account. For me, it just makes it easier for tracking. And for each expense tracker that I have, I go through and I add up all of the spending and my inflow. For my cash, I use some Valentine's savings that I had for $200. So that's a savings inflow that I use for my spending in my tracking period. I did the same thing with my checking account. I went through and added up all my colors, all my expense trackers into my budget categories, which you can see here. Okay. And I did all of my inflow for my checking account. That's the first step. All right, so after that is all done, okay, we have all of our expense trackers updated. We figured out what we want to do with the cash that's left over in our envelopes. We have all of our expense trackers added together, all of our spending. Now it's time to combine our cash total spending and our checking account total spending. So when I start filling out my Where Did My Money Go worksheets, I always work on these throughout the month to make this process faster. Now today we're going a little bit slower than I normally would because I'm explaining every step, but usually this process only takes me about 15 minutes. So let's start looking at this. Starting balance. How much did I have in my checking account the first day of my tracking period for the tracking period I'm closing out for the first day of February? All right, so let's go back and look. All right, so we had on our expense trackers, well, my starting balance for cash was 0. My starting balance for my checking account was $1,800.94. So that's my starting balance. So I'm gonna write that down here. 1,800. I'm gonna put 1,801 because I'm rounding. I like to round for my Where Did My Money Go worksheets. Earned income. Okay, how much was my W-2 earned wages? Well, for me, that's just my paycheck from the Budget Mom, which I know is $5,100. Okay, we have that down. Other income. Income that is outside of your W-2 income. Well, let's go back to my expense trackers. Let's look at this. All right, so for cash, I had savings used. That's not earned income. Here, other income, 2,604. It was what I added up from my checking account expense tracker. So let's write that down. 2,604. Okay. And then let's go to savings used. Well, we had a couple areas of savings used. So for my cash expense tracker, I had $200 for savings used. So just bring out the calculator. So 200 plus the savings used for my checking account expense tracker, which is 200 plus 2090.21. So that puts us at 2290.21. So let's write that down on our Where Did My Money Go worksheet. So 2290. Remember, I'm rounding for my Where Did My Money Go worksheets. So if we were to add these all up, all of the things that make up our inflow, so 1801 plus 5100 plus 2604 plus 2290, we're at 11,795. Okay, 11,795. Now you can see that my total monthly inflow is not just my earned paycheck. It's many things that I'm using for spending during this entire tracking period. Okay, so let's start going down and filling out our budget categories. Food. Well, let's take a look. On my cash expense tracker, I spent $473 for food, so $473 plus $14.13. So that's $487.13. Remember, I like to round for my Where Did My Money Go worksheet. So I'm just gonna put 487. And you want to do this for every budget category that you have. So let me go through these very quickly. Okay, so once you have everything written down from what you spent, now let's very quickly go over this monthly budget. I get a lot of questions about this. This monthly budget isn't necessarily your traditional month that you're thinking of. This is your tracking period budget. So if you're tracking, let's say, from the 15th of the month to the 15th of the following month, then that would be your tracking period budget. That's what needs to go here. So there is a set amount of money that you plan to spend during that specific tracking period. That should be your budget for your categories. So for me, I track from the first of the month to the end of the month, and I plan to spend $500. That's my budget for food. Okay, so you have to go through and add a budget to each one of your categories. Now keep in mind, your budget on your monthly budget category breakdown is going to be different than, say, your traditional budget that you're looking at here. Because take a look. So fun and entertainment, I give myself a $50 cash spending limit, but I also have some fun and entertainment happening up here in my fixed expenses. So those need to combine, and that would be the total of my fun budget. So that's what this is here. Okay, your total spending budget for your categories. Okay, so I went through and I added up all of the spending that I had, and I got this information, like I said, from adding up my spending on my expense trackers. So now if I look at this, okay, so I'm gonna go through and add all of these up now. So okay, this equals 9977. On your monthly category breakdown, you also have to include, okay, your starting balance for your upcoming tracking period. So not only am I closing out my February budget, but I'm also starting a new tracking period today. So what do I have in my checking account right now today to start my March 1st tracking period? Well, let's go back to my expense trackers. Well, right here. Right now, today, because I just got done updating my expense trackers, I have $1,818.44 in my checking account right now. Okay, we need to add that. I like to just go through and add that to my March expense trackers while it's fresh in my mind. So cash, I'm not rolling over any cash, so I know that's zero. Let's go into checking. Checking account, I have 1818.44. That's my starting balance for March. We need to add that to our category breakdown. Okay, so 1818. Remember, I like to round for my where did my money go. Okay, so now what we need to do is once we take our monthly spending for February and our starting balance for our next, this tracking period we're starting, March 1st. So 9977 plus 1818, that equals 11,795. Guess what? Our total inflow for the month of February was 11,795. Our spending plus our starting balance that we're moving into March, we also equal 11,795. So that's a perfect match. Now what I do is I like to fill out the difference and the percentage of total monthly inflow. So to do the difference on this, you would just take your monthly budget, subtract your monthly spending, your actual monthly spending. Now before I move on, one of the things I really want to quickly mention, during this process, I also go through and fill out the actual column of my budget. Check this out. When you do this, and this is why you do this, budget versus actual spending. Budget spending versus actual spending, very different. So I had a budget, yes, but I actually spent. So what you budget for might not be what actually came out of your checking account. What I planned to spend, my budget for my fixed expenses was 6,762. But at the end of the day, what actually happened and came out of my checking account was 6,559.84. That's going to change my leftover amount I have to spend for my variable spending. Variable spending, I planned to budget 1,185, but I only actually spent 970. So you'd go all the way down and you're gonna have a difference between what you budgeted for and what you actually spent. For me, I have a difference of 337.16. So I have $337 sitting in my checking account that I need to figure out what I want to do with. Remember, you need to have a plan for your dollars. So I decided to let that sit in my checking account for my checking account cushion. I'm building up my checking account cushion. You can say, well, you know what? I'm going to use that $337 to pay off, make an extra debt payment. Or I want it to go towards a specific savings goal, whatever you decide to do. But knowing the difference between your budget and actual spending gives you more control and awareness around dollars that are just sitting in your checking account. It gives you an opportunity to be really intentional with those dollars. Okay, so let's get back to our Where Did My Money Go worksheets. Difference, 500. So what I like to do, okay, so we have a $13 difference here, 0 here, 5 here. So what you want to do is you want to just go through. Now, my highlighter colors, let's go over that. If I'm under budget in a category like I was food, I spent under my budget limit, I like to highlight this in green. It's just a really clear way for me to see quickly if I'm under or over budget. I'm also under budget, let's see, in my gas and car. I'm also under budget in my health and beauty. So you want to go through and do that. Now let's go over very quickly the percentage of total monthly inflow. How do you figure that out? If you have the Budget by Paycheck workbook, there is a formula on the bottom of the page with a little star. Tells you exactly how to figure that out. So let's do food, for instance. So you're going to take your monthly spent for food, so the $487, and you're going to divide it by your total monthly inflow, $11,795. Okay, it's going to give you a number. You just need to move the decimal over 2 places. So in this case, I spent 4% on food. Okay, and you want to go do that all the way down. Now for me, I like to do this all just for my budget categories and my March starting balance. So let me do that now. Okay, so I have this filled out. Next thing now I'm going to go over, and let's go over now. I am using the debt-free printable version of the Budget by Paycheck workbook. So this monthly debt and savings breakdown that you might be seeing is different than the monthly investment and savings breakdown that I have in my workbook. So I don't have debt, so I'm focusing on growing my wealth. We're going to focus on investment and savings for me, but you're going to fill it out the exact same on your savings and debt area of this worksheet. So let's talk about our Where Did My Money Go, our total monthly inflow for my investments. So with this, what we need to look at is that total monthly inflow that we had on my budget category breakdown, this $11,795. So let's write that down, $795. And I invested, if we go back and we look at this, my investments, I spent $800. I invested $800. Okay, so that right there is about 7% of my inflow. How do I know that? Because you take your monthly invested amount, which is the $800, and you divide it by your inflow. That equals about 6.78%. So I like to round up, so 7%. Now with this, these are areas, what did you invest in specifically? Because I'm investing many things, but some things are more important than others. I want to make sure that where I am investing my money matches the priorities that I have in my life. So I know that I invested into a non-retirement brokerage account for me, which is a TOD, transfer on death account for me, non-retirement brokerage individual account for me. We also I invest in our joint non-retirement brokerage account, and I invest in a 529 college investment account for my son. Now, these are outside of retirement. My retirement is taken out of my paycheck, which is on my business budget, which is separate from my personal budget. So total that I invest for my brokerage individual is $100, $200 for my joint, and $500 for the 529. So the TOD, that's 12.5%, joint, that's 25%, and the 529, that's 62.5%. Now, when looking at this, I can say, okay, here's number one, here's number two, here's number three. Now, when looking at 1, 2, 3, and this is how much invested, so I invested the most towards my 529, and then my joint, then my TOD. You have to ask yourself, does this align with my financial goals? Yes. The 529 is the most important to me, followed by the joint, followed by my individual. Now, if we look at the total monthly income for savings, the total monthly income, see, this says income, this says inflow. Total monthly income is different than your inflow. Your total monthly income does not include savings used, because you're not going to save savings that you're spending. So we took that out. So if I look at that, it's 9,505. And how much I saved, well, if we go back to my budget category breakdown, it says I saved 2,253. Okay, so write that down. Now, percent of income saved, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to take your total amount that you saved, the 2,253, divided by your total monthly income, the 9,505, and you're given a percentage. For this, mine came out to 23.7%, or I'm going to say 24%. So in reality, I saved 24% of my income and 7% of my inflow for investing. Now, what did I save for? Well, if we go back to this is where you have to go back to your expense trackers. Well, let's look. I did my pet fund, baby fund, sinking fund, $5 challenge, February savings challenge. So let's write those down. So in this time, in the month of February for my tracking period, I saved for my sinking funds. I saved for my baby fund. I saved for my pet fund, the $5 challenge, and my February savings challenge. I was completing a savings challenge for February. Now you have to go through your expense trackers and look up, okay, don't forget to look at both of your expense trackers. So for instance, on my cash expense trackers, I saved $484 in cash, and I also saved 1277 making online transfers to different savings accounts. So for my total for my sinking funds is 1761. For my baby, I saved 332. Pet was $75, $5, and then 80. To do the percentage category saved, you do the same thing. You're going to take your sinking fund, so this total, 1761, divided by the amount saved for the month, which is the 2253, okay, which is giving me about 78.1% for my sinking funds. So I'm just going to round. I'm going to put 78 went towards my sinking fund, 15% went towards baby, 3% went towards my pet fund, not even 1% went towards my $5 challenge, and then about 3 or 4% went towards my February savings challenge. But once again, if we look at this, okay, well, the most went towards my sinking fund, followed by baby, followed by either my pet and February savings challenges are very equal. But if I look at this, yeah, taking care of upcoming known expenses is the number one for me, followed by my baby fund. And that is showing. This is why we don't just track how much money we saved, how much debt we pay off, how much we invested. We want to track exactly what specifically are we saving for? Are we investing in? What debt are we paying off? Because if you're tackling multiple things, you want to assure that where you're throwing your money aligns with your financial goals. All right, the next thing we need to look at, the last thing I do for closing out my budget, I personally like to look at this month, this tracking period spending versus last tracking period, or this month versus last month. Why do I do that? I like to see this because it lets me see trends between months or if I'm hitting my short-term financial goals. For example, one of the things that I wanted for February is I wanted to bring down my food spending. So filling this out will allow me, okay, am I hitting those really short month-to-month financial goals that I'm setting for myself? So if we look at that, first thing I like to know is, did my inflow change at all? The money coming in and out of my life. Well, in February, okay, I had a inflow change of about $2,138. Because look, if I go back to my January, and we go back to my monthly budget category breakdown for January, you can see my total monthly inflow was $9,656. And in February, if we look at my budget breakdown, it was $11,795. So that is quite a jump. So I had an increase in inflow of about $2,140. If the money coming in and out of your life increases or decreases for your tracking period, that should be reflected in your spending. If you have $8,000 less to spend in one month versus another, or in one tracking period versus another, that should be reflective in your spending as well. So in food, now I go through and I just write down what I spent for food and all my categories in February, and I only do this with my budget categories. So food, for instance, I only spent on this tracking period $487. Well, I already know I hit that goal because I spent $880 in January because I did a Costco run. $880 minus the $487, that's a difference of $393. So write that down here. Essentially, you're just taking what you filled out on your budget breakdown and adding it here. So what I like to do is I just like to look at my budget breakdown for these. So fun and entertainment's $240. Fun and entertainment, so $240. Oh, I increased that. Well, that makes sense because my inflow increased there. So that's a pretty big difference, $100 difference for my fun category there. So for my food, I did a 4%, 2%. So you're gonna go ahead and fill those out. Now, what I like to do with these is if I spent less in this tracking period versus last tracking period, I like to put that in green. So I spent less here. I spent more though in my fun and entertainment, and I know exactly why that is, Super Bowl. So I go through and I like to fill those out, and that's how I would fill out the last monthly spending comparison. Like I said, it lets you see those really short month-to-month savings goals and trends within your categories. The last thing I really want to show you very quickly, the very last thing I do is I come out, and this is the beginning of my workbook here. Oh, for February, I like to fill out my beginning pages. So for February, for my savings challenge, I saved $80, so fill that out. The next thing I fill out is my yearly spending overview. And this page lets me see trends from my spending across an entire year period, month to month. So I like to fill these out, and it's just my inflow information at the top and then my budget categories right here on the bottom. So I like to fill this out as well. So that was the full step-by-step process of me closing out my budget. And I know at first when you first see it, it seems like a lot. But in reality, the first couple of times, yeah, it might take some getting used to. But if you do the upfront work first, if you get into the habit of tracking your spending every day, if you can get in the habit of filling out your Where Did My Money Go worksheets a little bit throughout the month, you don't have to do it all at once when you sit down to close out your budget. You can fill out your worksheets with the information you know as you go along. And I think that's really going to help. But really, you can't close out your budget. You can't analyze the data. You can't see what your spending is telling you. You really can't even start this process without tracking your spending every day and getting to a point where you have organized expense trackers. That's the first step. I always say I would love and recommend that you get into the habit of filling out your expense trackers and tracking your spending every day over filling out the Where Did My Money Go worksheets. The closing out the budget process is kind of the last step, my last step that I take in my money management process. First, we have to build up that healthy, consistent habit of tracking our spending. And I know a lot of people, they're like, gosh, Miko, you track your spending every day. It just seems like so much work to do it every single day. Well, it's even more work if you get behind and have to catch up and then do it all at once on one single day. Trust me, it's a lot easier just to do 5 minutes a day tracking your spending. If you spend cash, save your receipts, okay? Because that way you can come back to it later. I get it, life happens. Sometimes we can't track our spending every day. Trust me, I've gone weeks without tracking my spending. But because I save my receipts, I've kept them in my cash envelope, I could come back and track my spending at a later date. And that's really helpful. So I'd much rather you get into the habit of tracking your spending before you even attempt with the Where Did My Money Go worksheets and closing out your budget. That step is really important because it's going to lead to doing all these other amazing, helpful things. If you found this video helpful, please like it and don't forget to subscribe. Welcome to the YouTube. Nope. Go, you're wasting my tape. Go lay down.